Hi, boys and girls. It's time for Chapter 12 of Indian in the Cupboard. Chapter 12 is called Trouble with Authority. What was left of the morning passed uneventfully. Omri even got a few sums done, which is a math class. By the time the first whiffs of school lunch were beginning to flood through the classrooms, Omri was congratulating himself for a stroke of genius in putting the two little men together. There had not been another peep out of either of them. And when Omri took an opportunity, when the teacher's back was turned, of course, to open his pocket and stealthily peer down at them, he was pleased to see them, face to face, apparently having a little conversation. They were both gesticulating with their arms, because there was too much noise all around for Omri to be able to hear their tiny voices. He had given some thought to the matter of their lunch, and he would separate them for that, one into each pocket, with some dry bits of food slid down to them. Omri let himself play with the wonderful fantasy of what the other kids' reaction would be if he casually brought them out and sat them on the edge of his plate. Funny to think that he would certainly have done that only a week ago without thinking about the dangers that might come. The bell rang at last, and there was the usual stampede, and Omri found himself in line next to Patrick. "Come on, hand him over," Patrick whispered over the tray of food. "Not now. Everyone would see us. You said I'd get him at lunchtime," said Patrick. "After lunch," said Omri. "No, now. I want to feed them." "Well, you can have Boone, but I want to feed Little Bear." "No fair. You said I could have them both," said Patrick, no longer whispering, now yelling. Others in the line started to turn their heads at the commotion. "Will you shut up?" hissed Omri. "No," said Patrick in a loud, clear voice, and he held out his hand, requesting it. Omri felt trapped and furious. He looked into Patrick's eyes and saw what happens even to the nicest people when they want something badly and are determined to get it, come what may. Omri slammed his empty tray down on the floor and took Patrick by the wrist. He pulled him out of line and took him to the hallway. "Listen to me. If you make anything happen to Little Bear, I will bash you so hard your teeth will fall out." This is, of course, what happens to even the nicest people when they feel like they're in a trap. With that, he groped inside his pocket and brought the two little men out. He didn't look at them or even say goodbye to them. He just put them carefully into Patrick's hand and walked away. Omri had lost his appetite, so he didn't get back in line, but Omri did. He even pushed a little bit in line. He was so eager to get some food to give to the cowboy and the Indian. Omri watched from a distance. He wished now he hadn't been too angry to give Patrick some pretty clear instructions, like telling him to separate them. Now that he thought about it, perhaps it wasn't a good idea to feed them in a pocket. Who wants to eat something that's descended between two layers of cloth with collected bits of dust and fluff that you usually find in pockets? If he'd still had them, he would have been able to take them outside to eat properly in a private place. Why had he ever brought them to school? The dangers here were far too large. Watching, he suddenly stiffened. Patrick had reached the food slot now and received his dinner. He almost ran with it to a table. He did try to go to one in the outside row near the windows, but a lunch lady stopped him and made him sit in the middle of the room. There were children all around him on either side of him. Surely, thought Omri, he wasn't going to try to feed them in there. He saw Patrick take a pinch of bread and slip it into his pocket. He wasn't wearing a jacket, and the men were in his jeans pocket. Unfortunately, though, those jeans were kind of new and they were loose. But still, he had to stand up a little bit to get his hand in there with the bread. When he was sitting down, the people in his pocket must be pretty well squashed against his leg. Omri imagined them trying to eat in a squished jean pocket. It was awful. Then Omri noticed that the girl sitting next to Patrick was telling him not to wiggle around so much. Patrick talked back to her, and Omri sucked in his breath. If only Patrick wouldn't draw so much attention to himself. Suddenly he gasped. The girl had given Patrick a hard push. He pushed her back, and suddenly nearly she went off her chair. She stood up and pushed him with all her might, using both hands. He went flying over backward, half onto the boy on the other side of the room, who jumped from his place, spilling part of his dinner. Patrick landed on the floor. Omri didn't even stop to think. He raced toward him across the hall, dodging in and out of the tables. His heart was hammering with a tremor. What if Patrick had fallen on them? Omri had a terrible fleeting vision of the pocket of Patrick's jeans being squished with blood around them. By the time he got there, Patrick was back on his feet, but now the other boy was angry and clearly looking to fight Patrick. The girl on his other side looked ready to clobber him too. Omri pushed between them, but a stout lunch lady was already intervening. "Hey, what's going on here?" she said, barging in with her big stomach and sturdy arms. She grabbed Patrick with one hand and the other boy with the other, and kind of dangled them at arm's length like a pair of cats. "No fighting in here, you know, boys. It'll be off into the headmaster's office." She dumped them down into separate chairs as though they'd been bags of shopping goods. They were both thoroughly tousled and red-faced. Omri's eyes shot down to Patrick's thigh. No blood there, that's good. But no movement either. Everyone began to eat again as the stout lunch lady stamped away, tutting as she went. Omri leaned over the back of Patrick's chair and whispered out of a dry mouth, "Are they all right?" "How do I know?" said Patrick sulkily. But his hand crept down and delicately explored the slight bump on the top of his leg where his pocket was. Omri held his breath. "Yeah, they're okay," said Patrick. "They're moving." Omri went out to the playground. He felt too jumpy to stay inside to eat or anything. How would he get them back from Patrick, who quite obviously was not a fit person to be in charge of them? Nice as he was, a friend as he was, he just wasn't fit to take care of them. It must be because he didn't take them so seriously yet. He simply didn't understand that they were real people. When the bell rang, Omri still hadn't come to any decision. He hurried back inside, and Patrick was nowhere to be seen. Maybe he'd gone to the toilet for some privacy so he could give the men something to eat. Omri went in there and called softly for Patrick, but there was no sign. No sign after lunch either. Not through the whole lesson. At last, when the teacher turned her back to write on the board, Patrick slipped into his seat and dropped into his chair. "Where have you been?" Omri asked. "In the music room," said Patrick smugly. The music room was not really a room at all, but a little alcove off the gym in which the musical instruments were stored, together with some bulkier apparatus like the long horse for gymnastics. "I sat under the long horse and I fed them, only they weren't very hungry." "I bet they weren't after all that they'd been through." "Aw, cowboys and Indians are used to rough treatment. Anyway, I left them some food in my pocket for later if they want it." "It'll get all squashy." "So what? Don't fuss so much. They don't mind." "How do you know they don't mind?" said Omri hotly, forgetting to whisper, and the teacher turned around. "Oh, there you are, Patrick. And where have you been, may I inquire?" "Oh, sorry, Miss Hilton." "I didn't ask if you were sorry. I asked where you've been." Patrick coughed, lowered his head, and said, "In the toilet." "For 20 minutes? I don't believe you. Are you telling the truth? Patrick, answer me or I'll send you to the headmaster." This was kind of like the ultimate threat. The headmaster was very fierce and could make you feel about 2 inches high. So Patrick said, "I was in the music room, and that's true, and I forgot the time." "And that's not true," added Omri silently. Miss Hilton was nobody's fool, and she knew it too. "Well, you better go see Mr. Johnson then. Omri, you go too. You were chattering away in class as usual. Tell him I said you were both disturbing the class and that I'm extremely tired of it." They got up silently and walked through the tables while all the girls giggled and the boys smirked and looked sorry for them. Well, some of them did. Omri glanced at Patrick under his eyebrows. They were in for it now. Outside the headmaster's office, they stopped. "You knock," whispered Omri. "No, you," said Patrick. They dithered about for a few minutes, but it was useless to put it off, so in the end they both knocked together. "Yes?" came a rather irritable voice from inside. They edged around the door. Mr. Johnson was seated at his large desk, working on some papers, and he looked up at once. "Well, you two. What is it this time? Fighting? Talking in class?" "Talking," said Patrick, "and I was late." "Why were you late?" "Well, I just was." "Oh, don't waste my time. There was a reason. There's always a reason when someone's late." "I was in the music room and I forgot the time," Patrick repeated. "I don't remember you being especially musical. What were you doing in the music room?" "Playing," said Patrick. "Oh, what instrument?" said Mr. Johnson with a touch of sarcasm. "I was just playing." "With what?" he asked, raising his voice. With What are you pulling faces about, Omri? You look as if someone just stuck you with a knife." Omri started to giggle, and that set Patrick off. "Somebody just did," spluttered Patrick. Mr. Johnson was in no mood. See, we know that Patrick probably did just get poked. "Stop that idiotic noise." Patrick's giggles were getting worse, though. Patrick would have folded up completely. Someone did stick a knife into him, hiccuped Patrick. A very small one. His voice went off into a sort of whinny. Omri had stopped giggling and was staring in awful anticipation at Patrick. When Patrick got into this state where he was laughing as if he was someone who's drunk, Omri took up his arms and gave it a sharp shake. "Shut up," he hissed at him. Mr. Johnson got up slowly and came back around his desk. Both boys fell back a step, but Patrick did not stop giggling. On the contrary, it was contagious. He just couldn't stop. It overwhelmed him. Mr. Johnson loomed over him and took him by the shoulders. "Listen here, my lad. I want you to pull yourself together this moment and tell me what you meant. If there is any child in this school who so far forgets himself as to stick knives into people or even pretend to, I want to know about it. Now, who was it? Who stuck a knife?" "Little Bear," Patrick squeaked out, tears running down his cheeks. "Oh, no," Omri gasped. "Who?" said Mr. Johnson, puzzled. Patrick didn't answer. He couldn't. He was now speechless with nervousness, almost hysterical laughter. Mr. Johnson gave him a shake of his own that rocked him back and forth on his feet like one of those weighted dolls that wouldn't fall down. Then abruptly he let him go and strode back to his desk. "You seem to be quite beyond yourself," he said sharply. "I think the only thing I can do is telephone your father." Patrick stopped laughing instantly. "Ah, that's better," said Mr. Johnson. "Now, who did you say had stabbed Omri?" Patrick stood rigid, like a soldier at attention. He didn't look at Omri he just stared straight at Mr. Johnson. "Patrick, I want the truth, and I want it now," said Mr. Johnson. "Little Bear did it," said Patrick very clearly and louder. "Little who?" "Little Bear." Mr. Johnson looked blank as he might. "Is that somebody's nickname, or is this your idea of a joke or something?" Patrick gave his head one stiff shake. Omri was now staring at him as if paralyzed. Was he going to tell? He knew Patrick was afraid of his father. "Patrick, I'm asking you one more time," said Mr. Johnson. "Who is Little Bear?" Patrick opened his mouth. Omri clenched his teeth, and Patrick said, "He's an Indian." "An Indian?" Mr. Johnson looked at him steadily for some seconds, his chin resting on his hand. "You're too old for those sorts of lies," he said quietly. "It's not a lie," Patrick said suddenly. "It's not. He's a real live American Indian." And to Omri's utter horror, he saw Patrick was starting to cry. Mr. Johnson saw it too. He was not an unkind man. No headmaster is much good if he can't scare the wits out of children when necessary. But he didn't enjoy making them cry. "Now then, Patrick, none of that," he said gruffly. But Patrick misunderstood. He thought he was saying he didn't believe him. He now said the words Omri had been dreading most. "It's true. I'll prove it." And here's a picture of what's happening. I'm going to read this part to you. And in his hand went his pocket. Omri did the only thing possible. He jumped at him and knocked him over. He sat on his chest and pinned his hands to the ground. You dare, he said with clenched teeth. "Get out of this room," he roared. "I won't," Omri choked out. "Out," said Mr. Johnson, and he grabbed Omri by the collar and hiked him off his feet. The next thing he knew, he was outside the door and hearing the key turn. He was locked out of the office, and Patrick and Mr. Johnson were in there. "Don't show him, Patrick! Don't do it! I'll kill you if you show him!" he screamed at the top of his lungs. Footsteps came running, and through the tears there was a sort of haze around him. And Mrs. Hunt, the headmaster's elderly secretary, came to him. He got in a couple more good kicks and shouts before she got a hold of him with both arms around the waist and carried him, shrieking and struggling, into her own little office. The minute she put him down in there, he tried to bolt out. "Omri," she said, "stop it. Calm down, boy. What's come on over you? Don't be a naughty boy." Please, don't let him. Go in and stop him," Omri cried. "Who? What?" the secretary asked. But before Omri could explain, he heard the sound of footsteps from the next room. Suddenly, Mr. Johnson appeared, holding Patrick by the elbow. The headmaster's face was dead white, and his mouth was open. Patrick's head was hung down, and he was heaving with sobs. One look at them told Omri the worst. Patrick had shown the headmaster, and we know that's the principal. Oh, boys and girls, I wonder what's going to happen next. Chapter 13 coming up soon. Bye.